Hey everybody, I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is a series of videos on Buddhist philosophy. I'm making these videos to teach Buddhist philosophy at Berkeley City College. So, if you are following the coursework and you're doing the course material, you're welcome to watch the videos as well, and not do any of the coursework. Unless I'm grading you, in which you're not, then do the readings. Try to have primary free materials posted online so you can do the readings even if you're not in the course or paying for anything. And read the text, watch the videos, and follow along with the videos with my lecture notes online at ericgerlach, ericgerlach.com. If you are taking the class, please bookmark the Buddhist philosophy page. I will continue to be posting videos about Buddhist philosophy now and in the foreseeable future. So for the course, we will be studying a good deal of Indian and Chinese philosophy. I happen to be a very big fan of telling people that many study Greek philosophy, not a lot, but far fewer classes are offered in Indian philosophy, much at all, and there are few classes offered in Chinese philosophy at American universities and American university philosophy departments. Very few to none. Some are none of what you hear of Indian philosophy. So this is a course which teaches a lot of primary Indian and Chinese philosophy. The Buddhist part in particular, we won't be covering Confucius, but we will be covering a good deal of Indian and Chinese logic as well as philosophy. So we will be covering Hinduism, some of the most basics that are philosophical, as well as Kanada and Gautama, the logic and cosmology of the Hindu cosmologists and logicians, as well as then the unorthodox, non-Hindu Indian systems of the Charvakas and the Jains, who are also skeptical. But the third and most popular form of Indian skepticism, of non-Hindu Indian philosophy that leans skeptical as well, is Buddhism, which is the primary subject of the course. So we're learning about Hinduism and the more into objectivity logicians and into subjectivity skeptics, non-Orthodox non-Hindus, to set the ground for Buddhism, which itself has many fine debates about objectivity, subjectivity, logic, and philosophy throughout its history, culminating, many would say, in Zen, and strange moments of Zen, which you can understand far better if you are understanding the entire history of Buddhist philosophy. Well, entire history as far as they or we have it. So then we will get into the Buddha and the Dhammapada, one of the primary simple short texts of Buddhism, of core Buddhist philosophy, and then we will be reading through some of the long discourses of the Buddha. If you just learn your Buddhism through Zen, you will think the Buddha said nothing and did very little and sat silently for a long time. He definitely sat silently for a long time towards his death, as Kalupahana argues. So he was at the height of his popularity, he was someone who was meditating a lot. But he went around arguing with people a lot, arguing with this or that philosopher, sage, as much as he could. And so the long discourses of the Buddha are the debates between the Buddha and other philosophers, sages, religious folks of India. So we will go through several of the suttas, not sutra in Sanskrit, sutta in Pali, the dialect of North India, which is what you would study to learn about Buddhism. And that is what Pali is studied for very much, to learn about early Buddhism of North India, along with and like the Jains. So we will be learning several of the long discourses, getting into it. I have videos about those already posted. Then we will get into Buddhism in India. I will be recording that lecture later today, in which we will read the Edicts of Ashoka, the Buddhist emperor king, who was not so Buddhist himself, but who brought Buddhism to and unified India with, for a little while, Buddhism. Somewhat like Constantine in Christianity, in fact, and related to Alexander and the Greeks in interesting ways. We'll be doing that, Buddhism in India. And around that time, you should, if you are following with the coursework, be writing on your first paper something about the debates between Buddha and other positions of Indian thought, and if you like, about subjectivity and objectivity, or if you like anything of the material that is interesting you would like to pursue an argument. Then we will be somewhat moving from India, and we will be covering Buddhism in Tibet, and then China, and then Japan. I will hopefully get those lectures done today, tomorrow, and very soon. And then we will have the background to move very much from India to China, where we will be studying the history of Buddhism in China, primarily Zen, Chan in Chinese, one of medieval, meaning between ancient and modern times, let's say, one of the most powerful forms of medieval thought when China was having its renaissance during what were sometimes used to be referred to as Dark Ages in Europe. That's a little, a bit anti-Catholic for the Protestants to say, but of course many aren't thinking about Europe going off in the Middle Ages as China is having its heyday, and the heyday of during the Song dynasty of China, the greatest and hippest of philosophies was Zen. They called Chan, and Americans and Anglophonic folks and many Europeans know Chan by its Japanese name, Zen. So we will be learning some about Chinese Buddhism and working our way then carefully through much of Zen, which I happen to like and many find very interesting. Some, after early Buddhism, some do not like early Buddhism because it is not very Zen, and some do not like Zen because it is not very early Buddhism. And the Zen, of course, see themselves as the culmination of Buddhism, somewhat like Protestants might, or various sorts of Muslims would see themselves, and Japanese Buddhists certainly, I have been alerted to something, Japanese Buddhists certainly would see it as themselves as the culmination of Buddhism, in many ways. I learned about this, some of my Buddhist philosophy, with Japanese Buddhist scholars, and there's more about that in a video on me, which I will post elsewhere. I won't talk much about me during this Intro to Buddhist video. There are other videos I have about writing your papers, as well as about me, and you can watch those videos as you like. So in getting into Buddhism in China and then Japan, and especially Zen, we will first be studying the school of names thinkers, who are Hui Shi and Gong Song Long. A white horse is not a horse, which is important for Taoist logic. I have already created those videos, and those are already posted. Excellent stuff for understanding Taoism and Zen as well. And then we will read carefully through Taoist texts, the Tao Te Ching, which has been, there are more texts discovered of that just recently even in caves in China. Then the Zhuangzi, my favorite Chinese philosopher, Zhuangzi, the second in command of Taoism. Then we will get into Zen, because in order to understand Zen, you should understand the school of names and Chinese Taoism and understand that all of that was blended together with Buddhism something powerfully in order to create an original Chinese school of Buddhist thought, which calls itself the true school of Buddhism out of India with Bodhidharma, but is very much a new school of Buddhism in China, calling itself Chan, aka, to the Japanese, Zen. So we will carefully then work through some of the work of, well, we'll talk of the legend and life of Bodhidharma and many of his awesome sayings. One of my favorite Buddhist sayings of all is supposed to be and attributed to Bodhidharma, who supposedly said that the tallest thing in the cosmos is the self, but the largest thing, thus one must say as tall as the self, but wider perhaps, is the mind. And in Zen, all is mind and continues to be mind. And that is what is. Affixedly. It's almost Parmenidean, in a sense. You can watch the video on Parmenides, doing for the Greek philosophy class, did a couple of weeks ago or so. So we have with that, we'll get into Bodhidharma, Huineng, Mazu, Xiaoshu, Joshu to the Japanese, my favorite of the Zen folks. We have Linji, who is the patriarch of Zen, who very much brings Zen together as Chan Buddhism in Tong, China. We then have the Blue Cliff koans, those case study, what is the sound of one hand clapping, raising a finger, raising a fist, many famous things to Robert Anton Wilson and others. I come from hippie-ish lands, and hippies have made this or that out of Zen, as did beatniks before in America and elsewhere. You have the koans, thus, the cases before the bench, like court cases, koans, of the Blue Cliff Record collection, the Gateless Gate collection, and then there are Zen stories of a more modern Japanese collection. It's an American collection of stories, which Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, and other stories of Japan, which are more based on modern Japanese Zen and traditions. which is true of our understandings of Buddhism, in fact. The Anglophonic world, myself included, understands Buddhism very much from the Japanese and from Zen, so we are moving towards it, admittedly, while being critical of all of that. I got to go to grad school and learn about Buddhist philosophy at a time when, which is a back and a forth both, German and American scholars and others are starting to be, have been, and starting to be in the 2000s, more critical of Chinese and Japanese accounts of Buddhism and Chinese and Japanese scholarship. Not simply antithetical and oppositional, but are coming up with new understandings of things that are quite powerful and interesting, not simply true or false, but quite interesting. And that changed the way that I think very much about human thought. One of the most important things that I learned about philosophy, and I've taught philosophy now at Berkeley City College for going on 14 years now, the history of Buddhist philosophy is one of the things in grad school which taught me more about how human beings work than anything else. And the reason is because it is such a different culture. Wittgenstein said it is only when the machine breaks down that you truly see how it works. Let's hope it doesn't break down in the next couple of weeks here in 2020. But, as people archiving this and looking back through the time capsule here, before everything gets set on fire somehow, that if you look at another culture, if it's when the machine breaks down, when not necessarily broken down, but when you look at something that isn't you, and it's not the way that it works for you, but it is the way that it very much is for you, it can teach you a lot about the ways that you do things. And Zen and Buddhists being into their traditions and fighting with them internally has taught me a lot about human thought, and how human thought is Greek, and it is Anglophonic in me, and white and American, but it is definitely human, and you can see a lot of human thought in Indian and Chinese philosophy. And I do believe that we should learn more Indian and Chinese philosophy, as well as Egyptian and Babylonian thought, and a whole rich history of thought. But it is very important, I say, as someone who was born and raised in the Haight-Ashbury, and raised during the 80s and 90s, is increasingly important, and yet it has stalled out so much, even in the UC system, that people learn more about Indian and Chinese thought in order to understand how human beings think. I will simply leave that there and not get ever so more political or ranty about it, but that is one of the reasons why taking this course or watching these videos is incredibly important, because human beings don't really understand the history of human thought, and yet you will hear people highly abuse the words logical, rational, scientific, and equate those with self-conscious and good, when in fact human beings have been trying to be self-conscious and good and rational and logical and ordered and decent and egalitarian and authoritarian. All of that in India, Greece, China, as we will learn about. Some call Buddhists democratic, and Buddhist monasteries are somewhat democratic, and so some say, the Indians invented democracy. I won't tell you that, but I'm highly critical of people who say, the Greeks were democratic. Athens had some democracy for a period, and there's some egalitarianism and authoritarianism, according to anthropologists, back and forth in African villages and amongst Amazonians in all kinds of ways. So rather than idealize things like religion, science, politics in particular ways, I suggest we learn more about how human beings function with thought and work, primarily in terms of being more aware of human emotion. I will finish out this video here by saying, as we get through the Japanese Buddhism, and we go on to Korean and Vietnamese Buddhism, as well as connect this material to Nietzsche, existentialism, postmodernism, pragmatism of America, and my favorite pragmatic thinker, who didn't like calling himself a pragmatist, Wittgenstein, who is very much like Buddha, according to Kalupahana of Hawaii, and is quite an incredible thinker in modern times. Called by many the last great philosopher, although some would say Foucault and others. And the Buddhist thought and Indian and Chinese thought can teach you a lot about the human mind, and then you can take that in whatever direction you like. I take it in all kinds of directions myself. I have trouble keeping it all together like my extended family. Yes, our species in common. So I will finish this out and say that this is all very good material to understand your fellow human beings. And we need more of that, and as Ambrose Bierce, who is himself a decent enough San Franciscan, said, well, Christianity is perfectly suited for the needs of your neighbor, according to each and every Christian. And as the egotistical narcissist said, what's everybody's deal? They're more interested in themselves than in me. I don't understand. We've had a lot of science, we've had a lot of facts, we've had a lot of religion, we've had a lot of politics, and yet humanity is all too human, as Nietzsche said. And Buddhist thought and Indian thought and Chinese thought can show you how human humanity is, and you can learn about that, the best and the worst, as much as you like, and apply that to your life right now. I would suggest that very much, as opposed to believing that China or America is simply democratic, or that science and what it does for whom is simply self-aware or for the public good. I would more so look at how Buddhist thought struggles in India and China socially to do so many things, and understand that Buddhism is one of the big three, not gender, class, race, ethnicity, like with left-wing academic folks like myself decently. More so the big three as far as Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, the largest cultures of thought that humanity has ever seen. And if Buddhism behaves a whole lot of ways in India and China, and if it's the largest group of people, and if Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam are all large groups of people that pride themselves on being international, that pride themselves on liberating people, that pride themselves on being diverse, on being multicultural for thousands of years, and saying, we are the great empires that bring everyone together in love and stand against the enemies internally and externally, then no matter what your politics, what your beliefs are about science, pretty much everybody believes in science since they can talk and then debate evolution or vaccines and things like that. So saying one does or doesn't believe in science doesn't help you learn anything about anybody. I find this all the time. Yes and no. It would be better, again, to study the history of human thought and understand more about how you think than it is to think you simply do or don't believe in democracy or science. Nietzsche said a long time ago, and rounding this out again with a bit of Nietzsche and Wittgenstein, it would be more pragmatic and more fruitful to think about how much people believe or don't believe in science, politics, religion, in the course and history of Buddhism than it would be to simply take sides and think that you know what's going on, because humanity has been playing the game of not knowing exactly which way we're going and yet surviving for a very long time. You can learn a lot about that with the history of Christianity, Islam, and the first and foremost of the three, Buddhism. So, that being said, we are going to talk about a lot that you don't necessarily want to bring up with all your uncles at the Thanksgiving dinner table, but all of this will tell you quite a lot no matter which ways you lean or why. You can watch the video about me that I will be making for me to tell you more about myself, but you can also simply watch the videos on Buddhist thought, Indian thought, Chinese thought, as well as Greek thought and modern European thought, ethics, logic, everything, and you can understand all of that at your leisure. So yes, hopefully you enjoy the videos on Indian, Chinese thought, and Buddhist thought, and philosophy, and logic, and have an excellent day, and hopefully we are all ever increasingly enlightened in ever so many wonderful ways.